Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of Luna Base and watched the sky above Earth turn black. The massive ships had been arriving for 3 days now, and each one was bigger than a city. They moved slowly across space like giant metal mountains, blotting out the stars. Jake had been a commander in the United Earth Defense Force for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like this. The first alien ship had appeared exactly 3 months ago. It was small compared to what hung over Earth now. The governments of the world had tried to make contact. They sent messages in every language and mathematical formula they could think of. The aliens had responded with a simple message in perfect English that made everyone's blood run cold. The message was short and clear. The Zeltharian Empire had conquered over 200 worlds in the past 1,000 years. Earth had 72 hours to surrender completely, or they would destroy every living thing on the planet. There would be no negotiation and no second chances. They had done this many times before, and they always won. Jake remembered the meeting at United Nations headquarters in New York. Every world leader had gathered to discuss what to do. Some wanted to surrender immediately. They said fighting was hopeless against such advanced technology. Others wanted to try diplomacy. They believed they could find some middle ground. Then President Martinez of the United States had stood up and said something that changed everything. She looked directly at the camera that was broadcasting to the entire world and spoke 2 words that would echo through history. Come and take it. Within an hour, every major world leader had broadcast the same message. The die was cast. Dr. Lisa Parker had been working non-stop since then. She was Earth's best scientist who studied alien life forms, even though they had never found any before. When the first small alien ship had crashed in Nevada, she was the first person to examine it. What she found inside worried her deeply. The ship was full of technology that was far beyond anything humans had ever built. But more importantly, she found records of every species the aliens had conquered. Every single one of them had been peaceful. They were farmers and artists and philosophers. None of them had ever fought a real war. The aliens had never faced a species like humans. Lisa tried to explain this to the military leaders, but they were too busy preparing defenses. She knew that conventional warfare would not work against the alien technology, but she also knew that humans had something the aliens had never encountered before. They had evolved through constant conflict and warfare. Every human carried the genes of survivors who had fought for thousands of years. The first wave of alien soldiers landed in New York City at exactly noon on a Tuesday. They expected to find terrified civilians running in panic. Instead, they found Danny Rodriguez waiting for them with a baseball bat. Danny was a construction worker who knew every tunnel and pipe under the city. He had spent weeks preparing with his neighbors. The aliens were tall and thin with gray skin and large black eyes. They wore armor that could stop bullets and carried weapons that fired beams of blue light. They moved in perfect formation, like they were all connected to the same brain. This had worked perfectly on every other world they had conquered, but Danny and his friends did not fight like an army. They hit and ran and disappeared into the sewers. They used the city itself as a weapon. They knew where every gas line and electrical cable ran. They turned the aliens' own technology against them whenever they could steal it. In Chicago, Captain Amy Sullivan was doing the same thing. She had been a marine biologist before the invasion, but now she led a group of survivors through the ruins of downtown. She watched how the aliens fought and moved. They were like a school of fish or a flock of birds. They worked together perfectly, but they could not handle chaos. Amy taught her people to be unpredictable. Never attack the same way twice. Never retreat along the same route. Always do something the aliens would not expect. It was working. The aliens were taking much longer to secure the cities than they had planned. In Australia, Ben Clark was using skills his grandfather had taught him. He was Aboriginal and knew how to track animals across the desert without leaving any trace. Now he used those same skills to hunt alien patrols. He could appear out of nowhere, strike fast, and vanish before. They knew what hit them. The alien commanders were confused. On every other world, the local population had surrendered within days. The psychological warfare that broke other species only seemed to make humans angrier. They had never faced an enemy that became more dangerous when cornered. Jake watched from Luna Base as the battle for Earth began in earnest. His sister Kate was somewhere out there with the space fleet fighting a delaying action against impossible odds. The aliens had hundreds of ships, but the humans had something else. They had the home field advantage, and they had nothing left to lose. The aliens had made one critical mistake. They thought conquest would be easy because it always had been before. They did not understand that they had just picked a fight with a species that had been preparing for war since the dawn of time. Captain Amy Sullivan crouched behind the remains of a burned-out car in downtown Chicago. The Zeltharian patrol was moving through the street below in their usual perfect formation. Amy had been watching them for weeks now, and she was starting to understand how they thought. They were like a computer program that could only follow set patterns. Amy had studied marine biology before the invasion, and she recognized the behavior. The aliens moved like a school of fish or a colony of ants. Every individual was connected to the group mind. It made them incredibly efficient when everything went according to plan. But it also made them vulnerable when someone threw chaos into the mix. She signaled to her team with hand gestures. Danny Rodriguez had taught them this system after he escaped from New York. The aliens could intercept radio signals, but they could not read human body language. 3 of her people moved to the left, while 2 others circled around behind the patrol. The attack came from 5 directions at once. Amy's team used hunting rifles and homemade explosives. They struck fast and hard, then melted away into the ruins before the aliens could respond. The surviving aliens stood in the middle of the street looking confused. Their perfect formation had been broken, and they did not know how to adapt. Dr. Lisa Parker was having better luck in her underground laboratory beneath the Swiss Alps. She had managed to get her hands on several pieces of Zeltharian technology, including a complete communication device. What she discovered made her both excited and terrified. The aliens used something called quantum entanglement to talk to each other instantly across any distance. Every device was connected to every other device in a vast network that stretched across their entire empire. It was how they coordinated their armies and how they controlled their conquered worlds. Alex Turner was a computer programmer who had joined Lisa's team after his home in Seattle was destroyed. He looked at the alien technology and saw possibilities that Lisa had missed. If they could hack into the quantum network, they might be able to disrupt the aliens' coordination. The problem was that it would require getting close to one of their command ships. Meanwhile, in the Australian outback, Ben Clark was teaching other survivors the old ways of hunting. His grandfather had shown him how to read tracks in the sand and how to move without making any sound. These skills were perfect for fighting aliens who relied on their technology instead of their natural senses. Ben's group had grown from 5 people to over 50. They lived in the desert like their ancestors had for thousands of years. They knew where to find water and food and how to hide from the alien search patrols. More importantly, they knew how to strike without warning and disappear into the landscape. The aliens had never faced guerrilla warfare before. Every species they had conquered fought like civilized armies with clear command structures and predictable tactics. Humans fought like wild animals. They used every dirty trick they could think of, and they never played by the rules. Admiral Kate Morrison was fighting a different kind of battle in space. Her fleet was outnumbered 10-1, but she had advantages the aliens did not expect. Human pilots were unpredictable in ways that confused the enemy targeting computers. They would do things that made no tactical sense just to throw off the alien battle plans. Kate had learned this lesson during the battle at Ceres. The aliens expected her to defend the mining station with conventional tactics. Instead, she evacuated all the miners and turned the entire asteroid belt into a weapon. When the alien fleet moved in to capture the station, she detonated the mining charges. The explosion sent millions of rocks flying through space at incredible speed. The alien ships were too close together and could not maneuver fast enough to avoid the debris. Kate lost the mining station, but she destroyed an entire alien battle group. It was the kind of trade that humans were willing to make. Back on Earth, the resistance networks were starting to connect with each other. Grace Miller had been an IT specialist before the invasion, and now she ran the underground internet that kept the resistance groups in contact. She used old phone lines and fiber optic cables that the aliens had not bothered to destroy. Grace had to be constantly creative to stay ahead of the alien attempts to shut down human communications. She bounced signals off satellites that were supposed to be dead and used emergency broadcast systems in ways they were never designed for. The aliens could trace any signal if they had enough time, but Grace never used the same route twice. The Bowl. First major breakthrough came when they captured a wounded Zeltharian soldier. Lisa Parker wanted to study it, but the creature died before she could learn much. However, she did discover something important in its brain. The alien had a device implanted behind its eyes that connected it to the group mind. Lisa realized that the aliens were not naturally connected to each other. They were individuals just like humans, but they had been forced to link their minds together. The implant suppressed their individual thoughts and made them follow orders without question. It was a form of technological slavery that had been perfected over centuries. This discovery changed everything. If the aliens were being controlled by their technology, then maybe that technology could be turned against them. Lisa began working on a way to disrupt the neural implants. If she could free even a few aliens from their mental prison, they might be willing to help fight their own empire. Alex Turner was excited by the possibility. He had been looking for a way to attack the alien quantum network, but he needed more information about how it worked. A freed alien could provide that information. The problem was that they needed to capture more aliens alive and remove their implants without killing them. The resistance groups began changing their tactics. Instead of just killing alien patrols, they started trying to capture prisoners. It was much more dangerous, but the potential payoff was enormous. If they could turn the aliens' own soldiers against them, the war might actually be winnable. Amy Sullivan led the first successful capture mission in Chicago. Her team surrounded a EA, small alien patrol and used stun weapons they had built from alien technology. They managed to take 3 prisoners alive and transport them to Lisa's laboratory in Switzerland. The experiments were risky, and 2 of the aliens died during the procedure, but the 3rd one survived the removal of its neural implant. When it woke up, it looked around with confusion and fear. For the first time in its life, it was thinking its own thoughts. The revolution had begun. The Zeltharian High Command was growing frustrated with the progress on Earth. What should have been a simple conquest was turning into a bloody mess that had already lasted 3 months. General Vex studied the reports from the surface and could not understand what was going wrong. Every other species they had conquered had broken within weeks of the initial assault. The psychological warfare that had worked perfectly for centuries was having no effect on humans. If anything, the humans seemed to become more determined when faced with overwhelming odds. General Marcus White had unified the resistance cells across North America into something resembling an army. He was a former Special Forces soldier who understood both conventional warfare and guerrilla tactics. His philosophy was simple and brutal. Make every meter of ground cost the aliens more than it was worth. Marcus had been teaching other resistance leaders his methods through Grace Miller's underground communication network. The key was to never give the aliens what they expected. If they expected a frontal assault, hit them from behind. If they expected guerrilla tactics, use conventional forces. Always keep them guessing and always make them pay. In her laboratory, deep under the Swiss Alps, Dr. Lisa Parker was making progress with the freed Zeltharian. The creature had chosen the name Free for itself when it learned to speak English. Free was eager to help fight against its former masters, but it was also terrified of what they would do if they caught it. Free explained that the Zeltharian Empire had been conquering worlds for over 1,000 years. Every soldier in their army had been born into slavery with neural implants that controlled their thoughts from birth. They had no concept of individual choice or free will. The idea of rebellion was literally unthinkable until the implants were removed. Lisa learned that there were actually dozens of different species serving in the Zeltharian military. All of them had been conquered and enslaved generations ago. Their children were taken from birth and turned into soldiers who would fight for the Empire without question. It was a cycle of oppression that had continued for centuries. This knowledge gave Lisa new ideas for fighting back. If she could find a way to disrupt the neural implants on a large scale, she might be able to turn the entire alien army against itself. The problem was that the implants were protected by biological safeguards that would kill the host if they were tampered with incorrectly. Young engineer Noah Adams was working on a different approach. He had been studying captured Zeltharian equipment and had made several important discoveries. The aliens used personal shield generators that could stop most human weapons. But Noah had figured out how to overload the shields and turn them into weapons. The modified shield generators would build up energy until they exploded with tremendous force. It was essentially a suicide weapon, but it could take out an entire alien squad if used correctly. Noah was also working on other ways to turn alien technology against them. Grace Miller had expanded the underground communication network to cover most of the globe. She was in contact with resistance groups on every continent and was coordinating attacks across multiple time zones. The aliens were having trouble keeping up with the constant stream of sabotage and guerrilla warfare. Grace had also made contact with Admiral Kate Morrison's space fleet. Kate was still fighting a running battle in the outer solar system, but she was gathering intelligence about alien ship movements and base locations. This information was invaluable for planning ground operations. The first major success came when Ben Clark's desert fighters captured an alien supply convoy in Australia. The convoy was carrying advanced weapons and communication equipment that the resistance desperately needed. More importantly, it was carrying technical manuals that Alex Turner could use to understand the alien quantum network. Alex had been working around the clock to develop a virus that could spread through the alien communication system. The quantum entanglement technology that made their network so powerful also made it vulnerable to the right kind of attack. If he could introduce chaos into their perfect order, he might be able to cripple their entire command structure. The breakthrough came when Free provided detailed information about how the neural implants connected to the quantum network. Every soldier was not just controlled by their implant, but was also part of the communication system. If Alex could send the right signal through the network, he might be able to disrupt every implant simultaneously. Lisa Parker was working on the biological side of the problem. She had developed a neural disruption signal that could interfere with the implants without killing the host. The signal would need to be broadcast on specific frequencies that matched the quantum network. It was a complex technical challenge that required both alien technology and human innovation. Captain Amy Sullivan had become one of the most successful resistance leaders in North America. Her Chicago cell had grown to over 200 fighters, and she was coordinating with other groups across the Midwest. She had also been training teams to use the modified alien weapons that Noah Adams was producing. Amy's biggest success had been the capture of a Zeltharian communications post. Her team had used the aliens' own tactics against them by creating false signals that drew the defenders out of position. Once they had control of the facility, Free was able to access the quantum network directly. The information Free downloaded was a treasure trove of intelligence about alien fleet movements and strategic plans. More importantly, it confirmed that the neural disruption signal could work. The quantum network was designed to control millions of soldiers across hundreds of worlds. If they could hack into it, they could potentially free every enslaved soldier in the galaxy. General Marcus White was skeptical about the plan. He was a soldier who believed in bullets and explosives, not exotic technology. But he also understood that conventional warfare could not win against such overwhelming odds. If the scientists had found a way to turn the alien army against itself, he was willing to try it. The plan would require a coordinated assault on multiple alien facilities simultaneously. They would need to plant Alex's virus in at least 3 different command centers, while Lisa broadcast her neural disruption signal from a powerful transmitter. It would be the most dangerous operation the Resistance had ever attempted. Free volunteered to guide the assault teams into the alien facilities. It knew the layouts and security procedures, but it would be taking an enormous risk. If any of the other aliens discovered what Free had become, they would execute it immediately, but Free was determined to help liberate its people from the Empire that had enslaved them. The Resistance leaders met in an abandoned subway station beneath New York to finalize the plan. Representatives from cells across the globe attended either in person or through Grace's communication network. They all understood that this might be their only chance to strike a decisive blow against the alien invaders. The attack was scheduled for the next full moon, when darkness would provide the best cover for the assault teams. Amy Sullivan would lead the strike on the Chicago facility, while Ben Clark's fighters hit the base in Australia. Marcus White would coordinate the overall operation from his command post in the Rocky Mountains. As the meeting broke up, everyone understood that many of them would not survive the next few days. But they also knew that failure was not an option. If the plan worked, they might be able to save not just Earth, but every world that had ever been conquered by the Zeltharian Empire. The counteroffensive began at exactly midnight across 3 continents. Captain Amy Sullivan led her assault team through the storm drains beneath Chicago, while halfway around the world, Ben Clark's fighters were moving through the Australian desert toward their target. In the Swiss Alps, Dr. Lisa Parker was making final preparations for the most important broadcast in human history. Amy's team consisted of 20 volunteers, including Free, who wore human clothing to disguise its alien features. They carried modified alien weapons and Alex Turner's virus stored on a device that looked like a simple memory stick. Getting into the Zeltharian command facility would be the easy part. Getting out alive would be much harder. The Chicago facility was built inside what used to be a shopping mall. The aliens had converted it into a fortress with energy barriers and automated defense systems. But they had not bothered to secure the underground passages that connected to the old food court. Amy's knowledge of the city's infrastructure was about to pay off. In Australia, Ben Clark was using very different tactics. His team of Aboriginal fighters had approached the alien base by following ancient song lines across the desert. They moved like ghosts through terrain that would challenge even experienced soldiers. The aliens had never encountered anything like traditional bushcraft. The Australian facility was smaller, but more heavily defended. It was located in the middle of nowhere with clear lines of sight in every direction. But Ben's people knew how to use the landscape itself as camouflage. They had painted their bodies with mud and moved during the heat of the day when the alien sensors were less effective. Admiral Kate Morrison was launching her own attack in space. Her rebuilt fleet had been hiding in the asteroid belt for weeks, waiting for this moment. They would strike the alien orbital shipyards while the ground teams planted their viruses. It was a desperate gamble, but it might prevent the aliens from calling for reinforcements. The space battle began when Kate's fighters emerged from behind a large asteroid and opened fire on the alien construction platforms. The enemy had been building a massive weapon designed to crack planets open like eggs. If they could destroy it before completion, Earth might have a fighting chance. Lucas Chen was leading the fighter squadron that would hit the main reactor. He knew it was a suicide mission, but he also knew that someone had to do it. His modified fighter carried enough explosives to level a city block. If he could get close enough to the reactor core, the chain reaction would destroy half the alien fleet. On the ground in Chicago, Amy's team had reached the mall's lower level without being detected. Free was guiding them through service corridors that the aliens had not bothered to map. The quantum virus needed to be uploaded directly to the facility's main computer, which was located in what used to be the department store's administrative offices. The first sign of trouble came when they encountered a Zeltharian patrol in the old electronics section. The aliens were conducting a routine security sweep, but they were not expecting to find humans this deep inside their base. Free quickly convinced them that the humans were prisoners being transferred for interrogation. Amy held her breath as Free spoke to the patrol in the musical language of the Zeltharians. She could not understand the words, but she could hear the confidence in Free's voice. The other aliens seemed satisfied with the explanation and continued their patrol without raising any alarms. Ben Clark's team had reached the perimeter of the Australian facility just as the sun was setting. They had timed their approach perfectly to take advantage of the changing light conditions. The alien sensors were calibrated for daylight operations and would take several minutes to adjust to darkness. The assault began with a coordinated attack on the facility's power generators. Ben's fighters used traditional spears tipped with modified alien explosives. The weapons were silent and deadly effective. The generators exploded in sequence, plunging the base into darkness and confusion. In space, the battle was not going as well as Admiral Morrison had hoped. The alien defenses were stronger than expected, and her fighters were taking heavy casualties. Lucas Chen's squadron was pinned down by enemy fire and could not reach the reactor core. They needed a distraction to break through the alien formation. Kate made the decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She ordered the damaged cruiser Phoenix to ram the alien command ship. The sacrifice of 200 crew members created the opening that Lucas needed. He dove through the gap in the alien defenses, with his remaining fighters close behind. In the Chicago facility, Amy's team had reached the computer core without further incident. Alex Turner's virus was designed to look like routine maintenance data until it was activated. Once uploaded, it would spread through the quantum network like a digital plague, disrupting communications across the entire alien empire. Free accessed the computer using its knowledge of Zeltharian security codes. The upload would take several minutes, during which they would be completely vulnerable. Amy positioned her fighters to guard the exits while Free worked at the alien interface. Every second felt like an hour. The virus upload was 90% complete when the facility's alarms began to sound. Someone had discovered the attack in Australia, and word was spreading through the quantum network. Amy's team had minutes before the entire facility would be swarming with enemy soldiers. Ben Clark's fighters were already engaged in fierce combat around the Australian base. They had successfully planted their virus, but the aliens were fighting back with everything they had. The modified spears and traditional tactics that had worked so well in ambush were less effective in direct confrontation. Lucas Chen made his final approach toward the alien reactor core. His fighter had been hit multiple times and was barely responding to the controls. But he was close enough now to see his target. The reactor was a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with dangerous energy. The explosion when Lucas hit the reactor was visible from Earth. The chain reaction spread through the alien shipyard, like lightning destroying construction platforms and half-finished warships. The planet-killing weapon that had been nearly complete was vaporized in the blast along with dozens of alien vessels. In the Swiss Alps, Dr. Lisa Parker activated her neural disruption transmitter just as the viruses came online in Chicago and Australia. The signal spread through the quantum network at the speed of light, reaching every Zeltharian soldier within range. For the first time in over 1,000 years, enslaved minds began to wake up. Amy's team was fighting their way out of the Chicago facility when the neural disruption hit. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Zeltharian soldiers stopped in mid-stride and began looking around in confusion. Some dropped their weapons while others turned on their former comrades. Free was one of the first to feel the change. The constant background noise of the collective mind suddenly went silent. For a brief moment, Free could hear its own thoughts clearly, without any interference. Then the chaos began as millions of voices cried out in confusion and rage across the galaxy. The Zeltharian command structure collapsed within minutes. Soldiers, who had never questioned an order in their lives, suddenly remembered who they had been before the implants. Some went insane from the shock, while others immediately began fighting against their former masters. The empire that had seemed invincible was tearing itself apart from within. Ben Clark's team escaped into the desert as the Australian facility erupted in civil war. Behind them, they could see the lights of explosions and weapon fire as freed slaves turned on their oppressors. The plan had worked better than anyone had dared to hope. Admiral Morrison's surviving ships regrouped in the outer system as the alien fleet disintegrated. Some enemy vessels were attacking each other, while others simply drifted powerless through space. The coordinated military machine that had conquered hundreds of worlds was reduced to chaos in a matter of hours. The war was far from over, but the tide had turned decisively in humanity's favor. The Zeltharian Empire was collapsing, and Earth had survived its darkest hour. The species that had refused to surrender had done more than save themselves. They had lit a flame of freedom that would spread across the galaxy. The neural disruption signals spread through the Zeltharian quantum network like wildfire, reaching every corner of their vast empire within hours. On hundreds of worlds, enslaved soldiers suddenly remembered their true names and the families they had been stolen from as children. The psychological shock was devastating, but the anger that followed was even more powerful. Free stood in the ruins of the Chicago command facility and listened to the chaos erupting across the quantum channels. Millions of voices were crying out in languages that had been forgotten for generations. Some were screaming in rage, while others wept for loved ones they would never see again. The empire built on slavery was collapsing from within. Captain Amy. Sullivan regrouped her fighters in an abandoned warehouse as the city erupted around them. Zeltharian soldiers were fighting each other in the streets as the freed slaves turned on their former masters. Some had joined the human resistance immediately, while others fled in confusion. The orderly occupation had become a chaotic civil war. Dr. Lisa Parker monitored the situation from her laboratory deep in the Swiss Alps. The neural disruption signal had worked beyond her wildest expectations. The quantum network that had once controlled billions of minds was now carrying messages of rebellion to every corner of the galaxy. The Zeltharian Empire was experiencing its first taste of revolution, but the victory came with a price. Many of the freed soldiers had gone insane from the sudden return of suppressed memories. Others had committed suicide rather than face the guilt of what they had done while under mental control. The liberation was creating as much chaos as the original conquest. Free had become the unofficial leader of the liberated Zeltharians on Earth. It worked with human resistance leaders to organize the confused and traumatized former soldiers. Many wanted to surrender to the humans and beg for forgiveness. Others wanted to fight against any remaining loyal forces. Free had to convince them that cooperation was the only path to survival. Noah Adams was working frantically to modify captured alien technology for the resistance. With Free's help, he was able to understand the quantum engineering principles that made Zeltharian weapons so effective. The hybrid devices he created combined human innovation with alien science in ways that neither species had imagined possible. The new weapons were devastating against the remaining loyal Zeltharian forces. They used quantum disruption fields that could overload alien shields and armor. More importantly, they could broadcast mini-versions of Lisa's neural disruption signal that could free enemy soldiers during combat. Every battle created more allies for the human cause. General Marcus White coordinated the liberation of the prison camps where captured humans had been held. The conditions they found were horrifying beyond description. The aliens had been using human prisoners for psychological experiments, trying to understand what made them so resistant to mental control. Among the rescued prisoners were children, who had been born in captivity and had never seen the outside world. They had been raised as test subjects in sterile laboratory conditions. But even after years of imprisonment and experimentation, they still possessed the spark of human defiance that the aliens could never understand or break. Captain Sullivan led a combined force of humans and liberated aliens in the assault on the main prison complex in Chicago. The facility was defended by a small group of loyal Zeltharian guards who fought with desperate determination. They knew that capture would mean execution for their crimes against sentient beings. The battle was fierce but brief. The hybrid weapons proved their worth as quantum disruption fields tore through alien defenses like paper. More importantly, the sight of their former comrades fighting alongside humans broke the morale of the remaining defenders. Most surrendered rather than face certain death. Admiral Kate Morrison's fleet was hunting down the remaining alien ships in the solar system. The space battles had become more even as human pilots learned to use captured Zeltharian technology. But many enemy vessels had been abandoned by their crews, who were too traumatized by their sudden freedom to continue fighting. The most dangerous remaining threat was the group of alien ships that had retreated to the outer system. These vessels were crewed by the most fanatical loyalists who would rather die than accept defeat. They were planning one final assault on Earth, using weapons that could sterilize entire continents. Ben Clark had returned from the Australian desert with important intelligence about alien reinforcements. Free had accessed the quantum network and discovered that the Zeltharian High Command was sending a massive armada from across their territory. They were determined to crush the rebellion before it could spread to other worlds. The approaching fleet consisted of over 1,000 ships carrying the most advanced weapons in the alien arsenal. They had been given orders to destroy Earth completely rather than risk further contamination of their empire. The humans had weeks at most before the final assault would begin. Dr. Parker knew that their only hope was to expand the neural disruption signal to interstellar ranges. If they could broadcast the liberation frequency to the incoming fleet, they might be able to turn the reinforcements into allies, but it would require building a transmitter array that was far beyond current human technology. Free and the other, liberated aliens provided the missing pieces of the puzzle. They had detailed knowledge of quantum engineering and could help design the massive transmitter needed for interstellar communication. But building it would require resources and materials that might not be available on war-torn Earth. Grace Miller coordinated the global effort to gather the necessary components. Her underground network had grown to include liberated aliens who provided access to hidden supply caches and manufacturing facilities. The Resistance was becoming a true coalition of species working together against their former oppressors. Alex Turner worked with alien technicians to write the software that would control the new transmitter. The program had to be more sophisticated than anything ever created. It needed to penetrate the quantum defenses of an entire fleet while simultaneously broadcasting the neural disruption signal to millions of individual targets. Noah Adams led the construction teams that built the transmitter array in orbit around Earth. They used salvaged alien technology combined with human engineering principles to create something that neither species could have built alone. The work was dangerous, and several construction workers died in accidents with unfamiliar alien systems. Captain Sullivan organized the defense of the construction sites against attacks by remaining loyalist forces. The aliens who had stayed faithful to their empire were becoming increasingly desperate as they watched their former comrades join the human cause. They launched suicide attacks against critical infrastructure in attempts to stop the transmitter project. The most serious threat came from a group of alien special forces who had infiltrated the lunar construction facility. They were planning to sabotage the main quantum resonator that would focus the neural disruption signal. If they succeeded, the entire project would fail, and Earth would be defenseless against the incoming armada. Free led a mixed team of humans and aliens in the hunt for the saboteurs. The lunar facility was a maze of construction tunnels and equipment bays that provided perfect hiding places for determined infiltrators. The battle that followed was fought in zero gravity with weapons that could cut through solid rock. The saboteurs were eliminated, but not before they had damaged several critical components. The repair work would take precious time that the defenders might not have. Long-range sensors were already detecting the approach of the alien reinforcement fleet. The final battle for Earth and freedom was about to begin. The massive Zeltharian armada arrived at the edge of the solar system like a dark storm cloud blotting out the stars. Over 1,000 ships carrying the most advanced weapons in the Empire stretched across space in perfect battle formation. At their head was the flagship of Supreme Commander Zeth himself, who had come personally to end the human rebellion once and for all. Commander Zeth had ruled the Zeltharian Empire for over 3 centuries and had personally overseen the conquest of 50 worlds. He had never encountered a species that could resist the Empire's psychological warfare or turn their own soldiers against them. The humans had done something that should have been impossible, and he was determined to make them pay for their defiance. On Earth, the final preparations were being made for what everyone knew would be the last battle. Underground cities sheltered billions of civilians, while resistance fighters took positions in fortified bunkers and hidden bases. The planet's surface was scarred from months of warfare, but the human spirit remained unbroken. Dr. Lisa Parker made final adjustments to the interstellar neural disruption transmitter that had been built in orbit around Earth. The massive array of quantum resonators and amplifiers represented the combined knowledge of multiple species working together for the first time in galactic history. If it worked, it could free every enslaved mind in the approaching fleet. Admiral Kate Morrison commanded the combined human and alien fleet that would defend the transmitter array. Her ships were outnumbered 10-1, but they had advantages that the enemy did not expect. The liberated alien crews fought with a fury born of centuries of suppressed anger, while human pilots provided the unpredictability that had always confused Zeltharian tactical computers. General Marcus White coordinated the ground defenses from his command bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. He had spent weeks preparing for the final assault, and every major population center was ready for siege warfare. The humans had learned from their enemies and turned their own cities into weapons that could be used against invaders. Captain Amy Sullivan led the combined human and alien forces defending Chicago. Her mixed units had trained together for weeks and had developed tactics that used the strengths of both species. The liberated aliens provided advanced technology, while the humans provided the creativity and determination that had always been their greatest weapon. Free stood beside Amy as they watched the enemy fleet approach through telescopic displays. The quantum channels were filled with propaganda broadcasts, from Commander Zeth promising swift execution for any soldier who had joined the rebellion. But Free and the other liberated aliens were no longer afraid of their former master. The battle began when Admiral Morrison's fleet engaged the outer edges of the alien armada in the space between Mars and Jupiter. The human ships used hit-and-run tactics, while the liberated alien vessels provided covering fire with weapons that their former comrades had never seen before. The opening engagement lasted for hours and resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. Commander Zeth was furious at the resistance his forces encountered. The rebel fleet was using Zeltharian technology in ways that violated every tactical doctrine the Empire had developed over centuries. Worse still, some of his own ships were beginning to show signs of hesitation as their crews heard the liberation broadcasts from Free and other defectors. The first phase of the neural disruption signal was activated when the alien fleet reached the orbit of Mars. Dr. Parker's transmitter began broadcasting on frequencies that penetrated the quantum network of the approaching ships. The effect was immediate, as thousands of enslaved soldiers suddenly remembered their true identities and turned on their officers. Commander Zeth watched in horror as his perfect armada began to tear itself apart from within. Ship after ship either went dark or opened fire on its former allies as liberated crews took control. The psychological weapon that had conquered hundreds of worlds was being turned against the Empire itself. but Zeth had anticipated this possibility and had prepared countermeasures. His flagship and a core group of loyalist vessels were shielded against the neural disruption signal. He ordered these ships to continue the attack while the rest of his fleet descended into chaos. If he could destroy the transmitter array, the rebellion would collapse. The final assault on Earth began with orbital bombardment that lit up the night sky like artificial stars. Zeth's remaining ships targeted major cities and military installations, with weapons that could melt mountains. But the human defenders had learned to use the planet itself as shelter, and most of the population survived in underground bunkers. General White coordinated the ground response from his command center as enemy troops landed in major population centers. The aliens expected to find broken and demoralized defenders, but instead encountered fierce resistance from soldiers who had nothing left to lose. Every street became a battlefield, and every building became a fortress. Captain Sullivan's forces in Chicago fought block by block against alien shock troops armed with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. But the humans had learned to use the city itself as a weapon. They collapsed buildings to create barriers and used the subway system to move troops and supplies. The aliens found themselves fighting an entire population rather than just an army. Space Admiral Morrison made the desperate decision to ram her flagship directly into Commander Zeth's vessel. The collision crippled both ships, but it also gave the transmitter array the time it needed to complete its work. The neural disruption signal spread across interstellar space at faster than light speed, reaching every corner of the Zeltharian Empire. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the Empire. On hundreds of worlds, enslaved soldiers and workers suddenly remembered who they had been before their minds were stolen. Centuries of suppressed rage exploded across the galaxy as billions of beings turned against their oppressors. The greatest empire in galactic history crumbled in a matter of hours. Commander Zeth found himself trapped aboard his crippled flagship as his own crew turned against him. The soldiers who had once obeyed his every command without question were now looking at him with hatred and disgust. He had spent centuries building an empire based on slavery, and now he was facing the judgment of his victims. Free led a boarding party that captured the alien commander and brought him to Earth to stand trial for his crimes. But the real victory was not the capture of one individual. It was the liberation of billions of minds that had been enslaved for generations. The galaxy would never be the same. The war officially ended 6 months later with the signing of the Galactic Freedom Accords. The document established principles of individual liberty and species sovereignty that would govern relations between worlds for generations to come. Earth became the capital of a new confederation based on cooperation rather than conquest. Dr. Parker led the scientific effort to develop technology that would prevent any species from being mentally enslaved again. Her neural protection devices were distributed freely to every world in the galaxy. The knowledge that had saved Earth would ensure that the horrors of the Zeltharian Empire could never be repeated. Many of the liberated aliens chose to remain on Earth and help rebuild the world they had helped to damage. Free became an ambassador, working to establish peaceful relations between the dozens of species that had been freed from imperial control. The former enemies had become partners in building a better future. Admiral Morrison commanded the new joint fleet that patrolled the galaxy, ensuring that no world would face the threat of conquest again. Captain Sullivan established training, academies that taught the resistance tactics that had saved Earth to anyone who wanted to learn. General White helped coordinate relief efforts for worlds that were still recovering from centuries of occupation. The memorial to the war dead was built in the ruins of New York City, where the first resistance had begun. The inscription was simple but powerful. They came to conquer us. We taught them to be free. Below those words were listed the names of every human and alien who had died fighting for freedom. The final entry in the memorial was dedicated to Lucas Chen and the other pilots who had sacrificed themselves in the battle above Earth. Their actions had given humanity the time it needed to develop the weapons that won the war. They had died as heroes, and their memory would inspire future generations to never surrender to tyranny. Humanity's final stand had become the galaxy's first step toward true freedom. The species that had refused to bow to superior technology had shown that the greatest weapon was not advanced science, but the unbreakable spirit that refused to accept slavery. The war was over, but the revolution had just begun.